Mitch Mcconnell, who joins us from Louisville, Kentucky. Leader McConnell, thanks for joining us. Let's start right there. Are you comfortable with the President of the United States seeming to equate U.S. actions with those of Putin's authoritarian regime?
Well, look, Putin's a former KGB agent. He's a thug. He was not elected in a way that most people would consider a credible election. The Russians annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, and messed around in our elections. No, I don't think there's any equivalency between the way the Russians conduct themselves and the way the United States does.
Does it trouble you that he said this? I mean, I'm trying to imagine your response if President Obama had defended the murderous reign of Putin by saying, you think our country's so innocent?
Well, look, I'm not going to critique the president's every utterance, but I do think America is exceptional. America is different. We don't operate in any way the way the Russians do. I think there's a clear distinction here that all Americans understand, and no, I would not have characterized it that way.
I'm not going to spend the whole interview on this, but you say all Americans understand. Are you confident the president understands it? Because he just said something that could have been broadcast on RT. I mean, he said, we got a lot of killers out there. You think our country's so innocent, when asked specifically by Bill O'Reilly, no less, about Vladimir Putin being a thug. Again, if Barack Obama had said this, I can't imagine there wouldn't be protests in the street.
Look, Jake, I can speak for myself, and I already have, about my feelings about Vladimir Putin and the way the Russians operate. I'm not going to critique every utterance of the president. I obviously don't see this issue the same way he does.
All right, let's move on. Turn to another topic that came up during President Trump's pre-Super Bowl interview. Bill O'Reilly asked the president about this evidence-free claim that Hillary Clinton received 3 to 5 million illegal votes in the presidential election. Here's how President Trump responded.
People have come out and said I'm right. You know that.
I know, but you got to have data to back that up.
Let me just tell you, when you see illegals, people that are not citizens, and they're on the registration rolls. Look, Bill, we can be babies, but you take a look at the registration. You have illegals, you have dead people, you have this. It's really a bad situation. It's really bad.
Do you want to spend taxpayer money to hunt for these apparently non-existent 3 to 5 million illegal votes?
Well, you know, this sort of thing is handled at the state level, and the Democrats always claim there's no election fraud at all. That is, of course, not true. The election fraud does occur. There's no evidence that it occurred in such a significant number that would have changed the presidential election, and I don't think we ought to spend any federal money investigating that. I think the states can take a look at this issue. Many of them have tried to tighten their voter rolls, tried to purge people who are dead and otherwise not eligible to vote, and I think we ought to leave that at the state level.
Let's turn to the travel ban. A week ago, when you were asked if the travel ban had gone too far, you said this is a question for the courts to decide. They're in the middle of doing that right now. On Friday, a federal judge in Seattle issued a ruling blocking President Trump's executive order. Early this morning, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected a request by the Justice Department to immediately restore the travel ban. This policy would, of course, be much more durable if it were passed into law by Congress, not merely by executive order. Up until this point, you've avoided explicitly taking a stand on the travel and immigration ban. Would you be willing to offer legislation to carry out the ban through the Senate?
Well, I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, the courts are going to decide whether the executive order the president issued is valid or not, and we all follow court orders. The administration is following the court order, as I understand it, and the courts will ultimately determine the validity of it. Let me just say, I think proper vetting is important to the American people, but there's a fine line here between proper vetting and interfering with the kind of travel or suggesting some kind of religious test, and we need to avoid doing that kind of thing.
Do you worry that the sweeping travel ban, as it's been described by many of your Republican colleagues, too broad? Do you think it went too far?
Well, the administration was modifying some of it already, and we'll see where it ends up. The courts are going to determine whether the initial executive order, as it was issued, is valid.
Do you have an opinion on what you'd like the courts to do?
No, I'm not going to give them any advice. We all want to try to keep terrorists out of the United States, but we can't shut down travel. We certainly don't want Muslim allies who fought with us in countries overseas to not be able to travel to the United States. We need to be careful about this.
The president has not had the same cautious reply as you just offered the American people. Sir, as you know, on Saturday he repeatedly attacked the federal judge who issued the ruling. He called Judge Robart, a George W. Bush appointee, a, quote, so-called judge, and he tweeted, quote, what is our country coming to when a judge can halt a Homeland Security travel ban and anyone, even with bad intentions, can come into the U.S.? You consider yourself a constitutional conservative. Do you have any concerns about the comments the president is making about the judiciary?
Yeah, I think it's best not to single out judges for criticism. We all get disappointed from time to time at the outcome in courts on things that we care about, but I think it's best to avoid criticizing judges individually.
Let's turn to President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court. As you know, Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon is vowing to filibuster Judge Neil Gorsuch because he believes that you and your Republican colleagues, in his view, stole the Scalia seat. Merkley writes, quote, Senate Republicans are in the middle of pulling off one of the great political heists in American history. So the question is, if Merkley makes good on his threat to filibuster, will you indeed take President Trump's advice and Mitch go nuclear?
Well, first, with regard to the theft of the seat, you know, you'd have to go back 80 years to find the last time a Supreme Court vacancy in the middle of a presidential election year was confirmed by the Senate. You'd have to go back to the Grover Cleveland administration in 1888 to find the last time a Supreme Court vacancy in the middle of a presidential election year was confirmed by the Senate of an opposite party. Joe Biden said in 1992, a presidential election year, had a vacancy existed, they wouldn't have filled it. We all know that that seat would not have been filled in the middle of a presidential election year, no matter who was the president or who was the Senate. Now, with regard to the new nominee, the president has picked an incredibly qualified, well-qualified individual. The search was handled extremely well. I want to commend the administration for that. He's picked an outstanding nominee who's got a sterling background of outstanding accomplishment at every phase of his life, and I'm very confident he'll be confirmed. The issue you asked me about is how will that occur, and I would say that is up to our Democratic friends. Any one senator can require the entire Senate to cast 60 votes to stop a filibuster and move to what we call an up or down vote, a simple majority vote on a nominee. So any one senator could make us get 60 votes. That has happened before. We had to get 60 votes for Justice Alito about 10 years ago. If we have to get 60 votes, I'm confident we will.
Just in point of clarification, obviously, President Reagan introduced a nominee in 1987, and then he was confirmed in 1988. So it's not as though he's never, no Supreme Court justice has ever been introduced during a presidential election year, although he was introduced in 1987.
The vacancy did not occur in a presidential election year, Jake. That's what I said.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure that people understand that. But I just want to underline this point. You just asserted, basically, that if Democrats attempt a filibuster, you will change the rules and use the nuclear option, correct?
No, I haven't said what will happen at that point. I'm confident that we'll get 60 votes. Look, this nominee ought to be treated just like President Clinton and President Obama were treated. In the first term of President Clinton, 2 Supreme Court nominees, no filibuster. No filibuster. We were in the minority like they are right now. President Obama, in his first term, 2 Supreme Court nominees. My party was in the minority, no filibuster. What we're arguing here for is equivalency. They're having a very, very difficult time, Jake, trying to come up with arguments against Judge Gorsuch. This is an outstanding nomination. You could argue the most outstanding judge in the current appellate court system. So they're really struggling to try to figure out some basis upon which to oppose him.
I want to just ask you one quick question on foreign policy, sir. On Friday, House Speaker Paul Ryan said that the nuclear agreement conducted by President Obama's administration with Iran is probably going to stay in place. Take a listen.
A lot of that toothpaste is already out of the tube. I never supported the deal in the first place. I thought it was a huge mistake. But the multilateral sanctions are done.
Do you agree with Speaker Ryan that basically this deal is going to stay in place?
Well, you know, it was an executive agreement only. It was not a treaty. So the Trump administration is going to have to take a look at this and decide whether they want to continue it. You know, the Iranians obviously haven't changed their behavior. The administration issued some additional sanctions related to their behavior the other day. I think they did the right thing. I don't know where this will go, but I know the president can alter the strategy himself because it's not a treaty.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch MCConnell, always nice having you on the show, sir. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a breaking news CNN poll revealing what Americans want to see happen to the Supreme Court nominee. I'll ask Senator Bernie Sanders about the Democrats' plan next.